My name is Sam Merlin. I've been a resident of Medfield for the past 6 years. My time in Medfield has pointed me in this direction of filmmaking, so I wanted to create a film to see what I'm capable of, to prove to myself that I'm ready, that I can actually do something like this. I decided to make a documentary on the history of Medfield. It's a chance to learn about the town that made me who I am today, and to learn about how Medfield came to be. The first step towards making this documentary is to do my research, to learn as much as I can about the town of Medfield. Now, there's plenty of information I can find online and in books, but I think the greatest resource on Medfield's history is the Medfield Historical Society. I decided to take a ride up to the Historical Society building to take a look around. There I met with David Temple, the president of the Medfield Historical Society.
Good morning. I'm David Temple, president of the Medfield Historical Society, and I'd like to welcome you to our always a little bit messy building. It was originally the Medfield Cooperative Bank, built in 1920, and it's been the Historical Society's headquarters since the early 70s, when the bank merged with another bank and moved out. Actually, the building serves us very well for our purposes. It is as solid a building as you'd ever set foot in. We still have the bank vault, and you can see the door of it there. It is centrally located. It's, strictly speaking, the library annex, and it's a town-owned building, which the town is good enough to rent to us for $1 a year, and this is where we keep all of the Medfield records.
The Society's records consisted of information on people, families, and homes relating to Medfield's past. They also have a vast archive of old photographs. The Society's collection consists of many other things, varying from just about every issue of Medfield's local newspaper to an assortment of antique weapons sealed behind the bank vault. The Society is definitely worth a visit. If you go to take a look and don't know where to begin, try starting at the Historical House's records. You may find your own home within, or perhaps a historical house within your own neighborhood. Either way, you will be taken on a wild adventure through Medfield's history. It is quite amazing to see how connected we all are through this history. And we will continue making connections through creating more history along the way. And you can be sure the Historical Society will be keeping track to make sure it's never forgotten. Books and old documents are great for research, but I wanted a bit more. I wanted people's actual input. But all the people I seemed to go to pointed me in one direction, to one man, Medfield's own Richard DeSorga. He's a retired history teacher, and now a town selectman. He's also the writer of 2 books on the history of Medfield. I'm sitting here in front of Meeting House Pond, and just across is the Dwight Derby House, where I'm going to meet with Richard DeSorga.
Medfield was first founded, as I said, we broke off from Dedham, and there were 13 families that first made that decision to leave Dedham and to come out here. The most famous, the person we consider to be the founder of Medfield, is Ralph Wheelock, for a couple of reasons. He was college educated, which was real unusual back then at that time. So he was educated over in England. He also, just not only incredibly bright individual, but he was involved in the original charter that founded Medfield, which we actually have the original over in Town Hall. He also, in 1655, town meeting votes to establish a school here in Medfield. Originally it was held in people's homes, but Ralph Wheelock is selected as the first school teacher, or master as they called him, which is why the present Ralph Wheelock School is named after him. He was also the first school teacher of the first free public school in America, the first school in Dedham that was paid for by taxes. And then when he comes here to Medfield, he also becomes the first school teacher as well. In addition to Ralph Wheelock, there was John Ellis, his family, Samuel Bullen family, Daniel Morse family, James Allen family, Joseph Clark, that's where the Peak House comes in with the Clarks, Francis Hammett family, John Turner, John Frary. We're sitting now in the Dwight Derby House, which is on Frary Street. This was the street named after the Frarys. Timothy Dwight, he actually lived here, was the first settler in this location where we're sitting right now. Robert Hinsdale family, Thomas White, and John White family. So those are the first 13, and they each were given either 6 or 12 acres of land, and they established their homes. They all would have been farmers that were here. And again, being right on the Charles River, they had all the grasslands. The other thing is everything on this side of the Charles River, which is Medfield today, was part of Medfield, but also on the other side of the Charles River, which was called the New Grant, that was outside actually the borders of Dedham that the Massachusetts Bay Colony had. That land too was part of Medfield originally. So what is today all of Medway and all of Millis used to be part of Medfield as well. So Medfield was on both sides of the Charles River. This is the wilderness, that you hear, and there was nothing west. It seems strange to think of Medfield as a wilderness town, but we were. And so when they left Dedham and came out here, they had to be totally self-sufficient. There's no stores, you're not buying, you're making everything yourself, and the community would very much work together. So when they built the house, the whole community would come together, kind of a house raising or barn raising. Everybody helped each other. As I said before, they were all farmers. This is all farming, and as you probably know, this New England is very rocky, and the soil is not the best here. So there's a lot of hardships, and the reason we have all the stone walls in New England, and particularly here in Medfield, is all those rocks were in the soil, and they had to dig them up, and then what they did here, particularly here in Medfield, they would pile the rocks on their borders, and that's why we have all these stone walls today. So wherever you see a stone wall today in Medfield, there was farming, that took place into that area. But you eventually had, you had the blacksmiths, and you had carpenters and others that eventually, as time goes on, they used their skills to then in turn to help other people. But we also had wild animals here, and again, you don't think of Medfield as having that, but we had wildcats, we had bear that were here. The worst one were the wolves, and the wolves were all over, and that was the #1 concern people had, because they would have sheep out in their back, in their barns or in penned areas, and the wolves were constantly attacking, the sheep. And so what the town did is they put out a bounty. They would pay people for each dead wolf you could bring in. The town actually would pay you for that. And there's just an interesting story. I don't know what it says about these early settlers, but what happened is the selectmen said, for each wolf head you bring us, we'll give you some money. So people were bringing the wolf heads in, and the selectmen were paying them the money. And then what the person was doing was giving that wolf head to someone else, a friend, who then was taking it and cashing in for a second time on that same wolf's head. So after a while, the selectmen caught on to that, and they said, no way. So what they began to do, each time they brought the wolf head in, they would nail the wolf head to the wall at the First Parish Church. So when you came into church on Sunday, you would look, and here's all these dead wolf heads nailed to the church wall, which prohibited the getting the second payment for the wolves that were there. So there was dangers from animals, just the hardships of being farmers in the winter. You know, we just went through a very snowy and cold winter here, but you know, we have heat and everything else. Back then, you had to have your wood supply. You froze here in the winter. And I think with the climate change we're seeing, the winters back in the 1600s were, you know, probably the winter we went through would be more of a normal winter, where they had, in some cases, there's records of 10-foot snows that were here. So, you know, just your hardships of surviving in the winter and making sure you saved up enough food from your harvest and feeding your animals and just keeping warm. So it was just basic survival in this really frontier community.
Tensions were high between the Native Americans and the English settlers from the day the English landed. After years of peace, the tension finally boiled over due to cultural differences and the settlers' assertion of dominance over Native American land.
When the war broke out in 1675, it started first in the town of Swansea, right by the Rhode Island border, very close to Metacomet's headquarters down in Rhode Island. And then the war spread out to the Deerfield, Connecticut River Valley, kind of western Massachusetts, and then the towns right around Boston, this area here. So Mendon was the nearest town to our west. That gets wiped out, again making Medfield again a frontier town. There's an attack on Sudbury, a little to our west. And then in February 11th, Lancaster gets attacked, totally wiped out. And so those here in Medfield knew sooner or later we were going to be hit. The attack takes place February 21st, 1676, a Monday morning. The week before, the town of Lancaster, just to our north, had been attacked. The Native Americans actually had a brilliant plan, I think, of attacking towns, because what they would do, we had a guards that were kept on all during the night. But as the sun, you know, as dawn began to approach, these guys are exhausted. They've been up all night long. You know, okay, everything's okay, and they would leave, you know, to go home. So the Native Americans usually attacked just before dawn, and they usually would sneak into the town, and they would break up into small groups. So you would have, you know, 3, 4, 5 Native Americans hiding behind every single house in the town. And there was always what they called a signal Indian. And that Native American would wait, and when he felt everybody was in place, then he would attack the house he was hiding behind and set it on fire. And again, it was still dark, so the smoke and the flames would go up into the night sky, and that could be seen all over town, and that was the signal. And when the other Native Americans saw that, everyone at once would go out, set fire to their home, so in a matter of minutes you can burn down the entire town all at once. And then the people in the home would come running out, and they'd be shot and killed, or if the homes were abandoned because the people in the garrisons, you know, that home would be burnt, the barn would be burnt, the animals would be killed. And town after town after town that was happening, and the town had to be abandoned. The people had to flee. The total entire towns would be burnt. So here in Medfield, the Native Americans used that exact same plan, but kind of a fluke thing happens. And Samuel Morse, who lived a little back from the corner of Pound and Main Street, not too far from the Peak House, actually behind where the baseball field of Medfield High School is, if you went towards Main Street. He gets up on that Monday morning a little earlier than normal for whatever reason, and he goes out into his barn to begin his chores as the day starts. And as he's in his barn shoveling the hay into the stalls for the animals, he looks and he sees a Native American that's hiding in the hay in the barn. And he kind of gets his cool and kind of slowly walks out as if he didn't see anything, and races into his house, gets his wife and his family, and they race down Main Street, and they make it safely to the garrison, which is where our town Brook Street is today. Well, the Native American sees this family racing down early in the morning, figures, I've been seen, and clearly the alarm will be set, and soldiers and stuff will be here quickly. So he sets fire to Morse's barn and Morse's house. Flames go up into the night sky. Well, the other Native Americans that were around town see the flames, they figure, well, this is the signal, and they begin torching, and all at once 32 houses and barns in Medfield instantly go up into flames. But that was not the proper signal, and Native Americans didn't have quite enough time to get here behind the Dwight Derby house, for example, or the towns in what we now know as Medfield Center. If another half an hour had gone by, when the true signal had been sent, then probably all of Medfield would have been burnt and we would have been abandoned like most other towns. But because Morse flees that Native American sets fire, about half of Medfield gets saved. All the houses here in the center of town do not get attacked. Isaac Chenery sees Native Americans coming towards his house at the end of Foundry, which was one of the garrisons. And so he gets his wife and family and he brings them down the street to where there's a huge rock, actually still there today, on Foundry Street. And he hides his wife and kids behind this rock. And again, this is a tradition, but it's a great story. And he runs back towards his house all by himself. And he sees about 7 or 8 Native Americans with torches about to set fire to his house. And there's which is still there today, that's the section of Foundry Street that's dirt. There's a rise, like a small hill, just before his house. So he's on top of this hill and he begins screaming in the top of his lungs, "There they are, get him!" And he starts racing towards the Native Americans. Well, the Native Americans figure, no one in their right mind is one guy going to be running towards us. He must have soldiers behind him. They turn and they flee. So his bluff works. He didn't have anyone behind him. So his house is one of the few on the outskirts of Medfield that gets saved. All this is going on. The cannon is fired basically as a warning to Dedham, but it also frightens Native Americans. Whatever they can steal, plunder from the homes, now they begin to retreat out of Medfield. They cross over. There were 3 bridges from Medfield to the western part of Medfield. They burn the bridges so that the settlers can't follow them. And what is today Bridge Street, Medfield, the bridge that was then called the Great Bridge, that's burnt. And the Native Americans have this basically victory feast on this hill, which is now Dover Road in Millis. And today there's a group of trees that we've since called the King Philip trees. And under those trees on that spot, it said the Native Americans roasted an ox, and they could look out and they could see all of Medfield, 32 houses, smoke coming from that, this great victory. Medfield State Hospital officially opens in 1896. Around 1890, they begin scouting out areas to establish, which actually were called asylums. Insane asylums was the name, which sounds awful. Was the name that they used back then. And they bought the Bishop Farm and the Merrill Farm up there. It was about 360-something acres of land. Beautiful, sits up on a hill overlooking the Charles River. And they began to send, actually a lot of them were Italian bricklayers and skilled bricklayers from Boston that would come out every day. And eventually they built the campus that became known as we know it, as Medfield State Hospital. It was opened basically as a receiving hospital to take overflow from other state hospitals. And the newspaper account said that the first residents arrived at Medfield Junction, which was the train station down on West Mill and Adams Street area, and that the whole town turned out. They put the new residents in wagons and they brought them up Harding Street, what is now Hospital Road, was then called Asylum Road, to the hospital. And it was built to hold 1,000 people, but within 10 years the population had already reached 1,000. But eventually the population, as we get into the 1920s, the 1930s and 40s, the population of the hospital becomes larger than the town itself. You had dances that were held up there. You had movies eventually that were up there. And so there was, and people worked up there. Almost everyone in town, in some capacity as an aide or a nurse or something, worked up at the hospital. So there was a close tie between the town and the hospital. So you had a lot of individual people that knew the hospital, got to know the people. There wasn't a lot of the stigma because they were up there all the time. And a lot of times the patients would wander off campus and they would go into people's homes. They would come down into the center of town and people would call, there's an escaped patient. The police would gather up, bring them in, bring them back into the hospital. So, and I know myself, just growing up, you would see somebody walking down the street and you would know, oh, here's somebody from the hospital. And actually, when I played Little League baseball, we had a lot of our games up in the campus up at the hospital. And the residents there would come in and they would watch our games. In the middle, someone would wander across the field, and we would just stop the game, and you'd wait, and the person would continue across, and then you'd continue playing. So it was just, well, that was kind of normal. You just did, which you tell that story today, and people are like, whoa, what happened? But it was just kind of normal back then. Medfield had a huge farm that was up there, all where McCarthy Park is, all the baseball fields, that was all farmland, going all the way down to the river. They had a huge barn, there was a huge silos, they would fill corn, hay, other things that were there. And the residents worked on the farms. There was a farmer's house that was there, he and his family stayed there. They grew strawberries and they grew fruit. And so part of the therapy, a lot of the residents had things to do every day. They were working on the farm that was there. We had a cattle herd that was there. We had a piggery, cows that were there. And a lot of the food, milk, and other supplies from Medfield State Hospital was used to supply other area state hospitals as well. So farming was a key impact. I can remember in the 60s when the barn, the silos went up into flames, they caught on fire, and you could see that all over town. I mean, that was way up into the sky. But farming is a key thing of what went on at the hospital. The beginning of the end of the hospitals being institutions we know of was the election of John F. Kennedy as president. President Kennedy's oldest daughter was born mentally challenged. They were very tied into reform, and many people by the 1960s began to look at I think there was a lot of people that were put up into state hospitals that today would never have gone there. Sometimes parents could, unruly kids, sometimes people that were homeless, other reasons were just stuck up into these institutions, and then once in there they could never get out. And by the 1960s, Kennedy wanted reform. He pushed through saying people should live in the least restrictive environment. And then they began to do like halfway houses where people could work out in the community and then at night return to an area. They know they have issues that they have to deal with, medication and other things that are needed, and let's deal with that in more of a family setting than in an institution setting, and give people a chance to get out into the community, work in the community. And so the idea of big state hospitals as institutions begin to disappear. And I think the writing, we begin to hear even in the late 70s, early 80s here in Medfield, rumors that Medfield State Hospital may close. We see Boston State close. We see Danvers and other area state hospitals begin to be closed. And so the town begins to be proactive on that, working with our state legislators to give us information. This is an important chunk of Medfield, just not only the land, over 400 acres of land at one point was up there, but also it ties into our economy. We want to be consulted and know what's going on. This is an important, a piece of the Medfield puzzle that's there. And rumors circulated again into the 80s, and the town had a study committee what to do if the hospital does close, and then that passed and the hospital stayed open. Then you get into the late 80s and 90s, and the state makes the decision to move prisoners into the hospital. And a lot of townspeople get upset. They say, look, especially people that lived in neighborhoods right around the hospital, said, we bought homes knowing there was a state hospital there, but it wasn't prisoners that were in there. And then the state makes the decision to send some of the criminally insane from West Bridgewater into Medfield. And they actually put this in the R building, this huge fence around, and that scared a lot of people in Medfield, and there was a lot of battles between the state and the town. And eventually, by 2000, the state makes the decision they're going to close Medfield State Hospital, and in 2003, it officially closes down.
Medfield recently purchased the Medfield State Hospital grounds. Its fate and what it is to become is yet to be decided, but for now, it's a good place for a nice quiet walk. It's also not a bad spot to watch the sunset.
Medfield clearly, to me, is just a very special community. I'm biased. I was born and brought up here. I've lived here all my life. My family was raised here. The town was good enough to educate me, my kids, to pay me as a teacher for 35 years into the school system. But clearly, this is a special community, and part of it, I think, is the history we talk about. Clearly, Medfield, more than any of the towns around here, we're the oldest of the communities, the first to break away from Dedham. We have a very special history, and to me it's so important to hold on to that. And I keep using the term, what makes Medfield, Medfield. I think it sets us apart. It's just, it's hard to put your finger on it. Just a very, very special community here. People work well. If you look at the number of volunteers that we have here in town, people give a lot of their time and their effort. It's just a great community, and we have a long history to be very proud of. And I think it's the more we get to know that and appreciate that as we move on, I think we just will continue to be successful in that area.
This is Sam Rowland, and I'd like to thank you for watching my very long overdue documentary. That was actually my senior project. It was a documentary on the history of Medfield. You know that already. You watched it if you're at this point. But I'd just like to take this time to thank some people and give some references to you about things you may have seen in the documentary. So I'd first like to thank Miss Brox. She's the one who organized all the senior projects and really made everything happen, had us all organized and everything. Um, so I'd really like to thank her for that, and also my inside mentor, Mr. Panziaco, really awesome, very helpful. Took TVP with him, and learned some stuff there, which helped me with this project. Also, like to thank my outside mentor, Aditi from Medfield TV. She's also my boss because I work over at Medfield TV, and it's great experience that I got over there. I really thank her for opening the doors for me over at the local access station, because that's what really kind of got me into this film and videography and all that kind of stuff. So I'd like to say a big thanks to her. Also, big thanks to David Temple and the Medfield Historical Society. As you can tell, they played a big part in this, and actually, we filmed like an entire tour of the Medfield Historical Society building, and there's a lot more to that, which I will release later on. It just didn't really fit in with the documentary itself, so I kind of had to cut it up a bit short. But yeah, there's lots of stuff. If you saw that kind of B-roll footage I put in there, that is probably, tons of information that I will post in a separate video later to come. Also, like to thank Richard DeSorga very, very, very much, because without him, I don't think any of this would be possible. He's really where I absorbed all that information from about the history. He gave me a bunch of articles and stuff he sent over to me to research beforehand, and he was just a big help, a very big help. And he sat down with me for 2 hours actually, or even more maybe, if I'm remembering correctly, because as you saw, it was very cut down in this documentary kind of final draft version due to time restraints. And if I think I included it all, this wouldn't be coming out. Like, this documentary would be even further set back, I mean, I'm already releasing it after I've graduated, so I thought that was a bit much, so I kind of thought maybe just get it out there. But there's this whole other section that I had to kind of leave out because I didn't have much, like, enough, I guess, interesting material for it to really kind of put it in there. But there's a whole segment on the Medfield Hat Factory, which didn't make the cut, but I will be posting that later. It will be part of an interview video, the full interview with Richard DeSorga. So keep an eye out for that. That should come in later weeks, I want to say. Depends on how long it takes me to edit it. But yeah, it should be out pretty quickly. It's not gonna be long overdue like this, I promise. But yeah, so a big thanks to all those people. Also, a big thanks to the Dwight Derby House. As you saw, we mentioned in the documentary that we did the interview with Richard Sorga over there, and so I'd really like to thank them for letting us come in and film there, because they had it's just a beautiful home, and there were so many different places where we could have set up, and we set up in front of this, as you saw, this fireplace kind of there. It looked kind of like a colonial fireplace. I'm not too sure about architecture history. That's one thing I didn't go into, but it looked like this big colonial kind of fireplace, and it looked really nice. The lighting was pretty bad, but that was my fault that I didn't wasn't on top of that. But I think it still turned out pretty well in the end, I hope. But yeah, so a big thanks to all those people once again. Wouldn't be possible without them to make this, and thank you for watching. So now some references right now for you guys. I highly suggest you go to the Medfield Historical Society building. You can learn so much there. Once I have the kind of tour video come out, you can kind of see what there is there. We kind of started off. I toured it with David Temple, of course, and we started off where we looked at my house. My house wasn't in the historical houses references, but there was a house not far from me that apparently belonged to John Turner. They had John Turner's musket, all antique weapon musket there, and then it just went on and on and on. And there's so many different connections throughout history from just starting at one point. And it's really interesting. I highly suggest you go over, take a look for yourself. I think they're open on Saturdays. I'll have to check the times. I'll put the times up on the screen here. So, and I'll also leave links in the description of this video. So be sure to check that out. Also, definitely watch Medfield TV, because, well, they have stuff on, the town, and maybe not exactly history stuff. They do have a lot of that, though, actually. Um, that was another part that I kind of referenced, was some of the interviews they've done in the past about the history of Medfield. But also, the current history that's being made in the town today, because I think a big part is that there's so much, uninformed kind of people, and people don't know where to get their information from and all that stuff, and then it becomes this big argument. But really, there's sources out there to go to, and I think Medfield TV is one of the big ones, and it's played a big role in my life. And I mean, this is just saying thanks to them, and for all their hard work, because they work really hard over there, and to put those programs out. So I highly suggest you go over there. watch it. They have a YouTube channel. They have their own website. I'll link again in the description. I know this is a long kind of after part, so sorry, but bear with me. Just a bit longer. Definitely go tour the Dwight Derby house. It is one of the most beautiful homes I have ever seen. It's just beautiful. You have to go see for yourself. Um, there will be, there's some like reference pictures in the documentary, I believe, that you can go look at. But it's not the same as seeing it for yourself. It's a beautiful home. Go check it out. I'm not sure if they do tours or not, but if they do a tour, then definitely do that because there's a lot of history in that house, especially uh, kind of history on the different architecture throughout the years. So that was a really interesting part. But other than that, I think that's all. So thank you so much for watching, and have a good day.